if you said, Melissa, we get groundbreaking data on their phase 3 readouts, do you not think that we'll see right away a lot more like headline names of people writing checks, getting more and more involved in this space? Hey everyone, welcome to our latest TDR Psychedelic Exclusive. Today, interesting conversation. Last month when we were in Denver, met a lot of interesting people, from business executives to institutional investors, and some very interesting conversations that we had with a few lobbyists while we're there. And that's the whole reason for today's podcast, as we welcome in the CEO of Washington, D.C.-based Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, Melissa Lavasani. Great to have you on and great to see you again.
Great to see you, Shad.
Yes, I appreciate you jumping on. Anthony Verrill, good to see you, sir.
How's it going?
Good. As I said off the top, interesting conference, to say the least. Melissa, let's begin with you. First off, you know, for someone like yourself that's in Washington, speaking to a lot of politicians, overall, what was the event like for you last month? Was it a big step in the right direction for just awareness for the industry, did you find?
Yeah, I mean, I think that culturally, Psychedelic Science 2023 was very different than, you know, the kind of conversations that we have day in and day out with members of Congress. But it's important to remember that this isn't as simple as bringing a new medication to market. You know, these are psychedelic drugs that have a very long history in the United States, have a long history in the scientific community, and they're going to be treated differently. And I think that understanding what has been happening in the underground and bringing things that can be really beneficial and helpful to people as they go on these journeys with psychedelic medicine, bringing that above ground, and how do we legitimize this space in a meaningful way so people have affordable access. So it's always great to have that connection with kind of the psychedelic culture and what we can extract from that and bring that more mainstream.
How do you see it?
Go ahead, Anthony.
How do you see it shaping up from a regulatory perspective? Because I know, like, right now we're looking at a very broad spectrum of, I don't want to call them therapies, but I guess methods of use, from everything from like out of country, like retreats, to obviously you look at the drug development progress and what these biotech companies are working towards. And I mean, a lot of the people that you speak to in the industry, we want to find a happy medium for everyone to really exist. I mean, do you see like some of these things coming together all at once, or taking a step forward towards like standardized medicine and then working our way back, bringing in everything from the fringe and more of like the, I guess, I don't want to call them out there, but less traditional methods of use?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think this is going to happen step by step.
Yeah.
The federal government is not going to go full into psychedelic medicine. I think that they're going to move at a pace that they're comfortable with. You know, MDMA has been in clinical trial with the FDA for so long. Rick Doblin's done an amazing job of working with the FDA and with government and bringing subject matter experts on his team to properly approach this issue with government. And it's part of his genius. But he knew when he started on his journey decades ago that this is going to be a long process. I think that the first step is getting to MDMA approval, and then DEA has 90 days to reschedule, which they have to reschedule it once it's approved by the FDA. And then, you know, we'll see what kind of restrictions are around MDMA therapy. My assumption is that it'll be pretty restrictive at first, and as time goes on, as more data comes out, things will start opening up a bit, and we can broaden the conversation a bit. But we all know that psilocybin is very quickly behind MDMA, and that'll be next in line in the conversation. And I think, you know, the groundwork that we're laying right now with Congress and educating other government officials about this issue, and the interest that's already within government organically, and the champions that we're building relationships with, I think has been helpful in making sure that we're mitigating any of the road bumps that we may run into as these medicines come online. And, you know, I think that the issues with our healthcare system and the arguments that people have with psychedelic medicine and putting them into our healthcare system, we can, this provides us a forum to really address those issues.
Oh, yeah.
And how do we engage with communities that feel really disenfranchised with healthcare system, and using, entering the door with psychedelic medicine and broadening that conversation beyond psychedelics. And let's talk about healthcare as a whole, and mental health care, and what services are available, and really redefining or defining trauma for the first time for members of Congress and their staffers who really don't understand what mental health challenges are, but have experience either personally or with friends of theirs. These are really important conversations to be had. And while it seems like we are very much slow rolling everything, we have to slow roll right now. We talk to some member offices that they can't differentiate between MDMA and LSD and mushrooms. They don't know the difference of it. So we're really starting from the ground up here. But our hope is that, in aggregate, once all said and done, we create a healthcare system that is far more inclusive and accessible for people, so they can actually treat the issues that they're going with instead of putting Band-Aids on them like we have been in the past.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I think it's something that people really need to talk about, because I've seen everything from obviously firsthand accounts with gentlemen that I met at PS 2023 that had gone through PTSD, that had gone through TRD, and used psychedelics, and as a result, there were life-changing effects. But then I've also been reading articles online where it's like tech companies and like big companies want to leverage psychedelics to give employees tune-ups as like a retreat, which I tend to not agree with unless you are talking about trauma or you're talking about some sort of therapeutic use case. But I mean, it's going to be quite interesting to see how that's rolled out and what the real I guess choke points are on the rollout as these molecules start to get scale.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to a point where we're talking about psychedelics just for general wellness. I think there are the entry point with psychedelics and the advocacy that's happening at a federal level has obviously been with the veteran community. They garner bipartisan support. There's not one member of Congress that wouldn't support something for veterans, but just understanding that, we've been working at this for a few years now, since 2021, and it's been, even though veterans garner bipartisan support and they have really compelling stories of healing, it's still been really challenging to get over the political hurdles that exist within Congress. Sure. I don't think we've had such insane kind of tension between the two parties. It's really wild right now, and I think that psychedelics, and we see this with AOC and Crenshaw partnering on amendments to the NDAA and their own bills.
That was a headliner, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like it brings everything full circle, right? The people from two opposite sides of the political spectrum that probably don't agree on much can agree on this, and I think it's just capturing everybody else in the middle. And how do we do that? By ensuring that psychedelics and mental health at first, and issues like TBI and headaches, and we're going to get there. But the mental health issue is the one that seems most pressing for members of Congress.
That's interesting. So I was going to say, because let's face it, the data is what's really providing a lot of attention for this industry. You see governments advocating for things like our environment. When it comes to mental health, how much of an importance or topic of conversation is taking place within Washington that pertains to that?
I mean, our lawmakers understand that mental health crisis and the addiction crisis our country's facing right now is
something never seen before, right?
It's unprecedented. And COVID absolutely triggered that. I think it was underlying much more before COVID, but COVID has really brought to light a lot of people's issues. Me personally, I've had multiple friends that have gotten on medication since that time and are still on it, are afraid to get off of it because this is their new normal. And then, the opioid crisis is one that's been looming for a while now, and it's now worse than it's ever been. This is impacting communities beyond any socioeconomic borders or any racial borders. this is impacting every community in our country right now, and it needs to be addressed. And for me, when I talk about this, especially with a certain side of the political spectrum, this is a national security issue. Americans are not well, and what is our government doing to protect us and provide solutions that are actually effective? And I'm hoping that, our president has shown signs that he is, really interested in making some progress in this space. There's a lot of focus in his administration on harm reduction, and that's a change in tone a bit from presidents of the past. But I would love to see like a mental health omnibus bill come out that has psychedelics included in it. That is like a full 360. What can the federal government do, and how can they interact with state governments to improve this issue? But, again, you've got to have the political will for something like that. So that's why, we are with the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, we lobby Congress, and that is really important work that we're doing. But we have a sister organization called Psychedelic Medicine Advocacy that we just launched that is really reaching out to communities across the country and getting them educated about psychedelics and getting them activated so that they understand that this is a therapy that your federal government should be exploring, and we're currently not really doing it. So getting the people, which are constituents of various members of Congress who are voters, and getting them to call their member of Congress and say, why aren't you exploring these as options? Yeah. The data seems really promising. Why can't we just put some funding towards research? And NIH is the biggest funder of research, and why can't we take just a tiny chunk of that for psychedelics? So creating that political will within the people is also really important to have multiple pressure points on lawmakers.
What's their response to that when you bring all that stuff up?
I think that they are surprised to hear about how effective psychedelics are.
Yeah.
Some of these rates that people are getting relief from alcohol addiction, smoking cessation, depression, we haven't seen anything like this with traditional medications. So when NYU released their alcoholism study last year, and 80% of the participants are abstaining from drinking, that is astounding. And
it's
you have institutions like NYU, like Johns Hopkins, Stanford. Yeah, you're like, do I believe this? It sounds too good to be true. But it isn't. Like these are powerful drugs. And if we can do this the right way, we can really shift society in a different direction. Do I think it's going to cure all of our issues? I don't know. Those are very grand statements that the media likes to make. And I get very nervous whenever I see a headline that's talking about a cure for anything. But you can't ignore some of this data that's coming out, and that really shifts the conversation. When we go into a member of Congress's office, we usually start with a story, somebody that has a really compelling story of mental health or addiction and how they overcame it. So we kind of open up their heart a little bit and soften the conversation, because I think sometimes you go into an office and they know it's a meeting about psychedelics, and they want to be a little bit a hard edge a little bit, and the baggage that comes along with psychedelics is very much present at the beginning of the conversation. But when I share my personal story about healing with psychedelic medicine after my son was born, they know that, like, oh, this is a working mother. This isn't somebody that's just trying to get high. For me personally, I was just trying to find a solution. And for so many veterans, like, this is a life or death decision that they're making. Yeah. They've gone through the VA. They're disenfranchised from the VA, and nothing that the VA has done has worked. So in an act of desperation, they're going to these psychedelic drugs, whether it's in another country or trying to get into a clinical trial, and to have their life back. Like, that's really meaningful. And then you follow up with some of the data. You drop names like Johns Hopkins University, and that will open up the ears of any member of Congress. These are really respected institutions that are doing amazing cutting edge work. And the conversation is much different, I think, than what they anticipated.
Yeah. Have you had any conversations about, or curious to hear your point of view on this, about redefining the sector, like dropping the psychedelics the descriptor? Because I can speak from a first person account that when I first heard about this industry coming out it's probably about 2.5 years ago, where the company started to go public and it really started to get traction, I immediately was like, no, like there's no way. And I mean, from a first account, like my dad had TRD, my brother was addicted to opiates. Both of them didn't leverage psychedelics, but kind of got past both cases, which if I knew about psychedelics back then, I definitely would have had them both try the treatments, and it probably would have been a much faster pace out of it. But I mean, when I talk to people and I say psychedelics, whether they're highly educated, whether they're just someone on the street, they're immediately like, oh, well, they think about like Woodstock and like LSD and like hippies. It's like, I feel like for some, it would be useful to even have the conversation about redefining it as a sector and as a category, and taking that label off, as much as I wouldn't like to, because it is rooted in the molecules that we're actually leveraging. But it's just, I feel like if we can kick that, you would start to see traction, especially from a public point of view.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple different terms come out, like emerging therapies, breakthrough therapies.
Yeah.
I personally really battled with this when I was creating my organization, and I even didn't want that word in our name. And I actually initially named our organization the Plant Medicine Coalition, because I felt like that was much softer around the edges. But what I found was, as we started our meetings with Congress, we kept getting mistaken as advocating for cannabis, because I think cannabis took over the plant medicine term to soften things up for themselves. And then we kind of got lumped into that. And I really think this is a very different issue than cannabis. I wanted to differentiate ourselves from that movement.
Can I ask you something real quick? When somebody asks you, what's the difference between cannabis and psychedelics, because there's a huge difference, how do you best respond to that? What would you say?
I mean, cannabis is a plant that has, there is opportunities to use it recreationally. You can obviously use psychedelics recreationally, but I think there's a lot that we don't know about cannabis. And
there's a lot more data in psychedelics.
There's a lot more data in psychedelics. I personally think people can get addicted to cannabis, maybe 100%. Not physically, but it's like a habit forming thing, that psychedelics don't have that quality. They're anti-addictive. So, you can try and take mushrooms every day, but your body will literally reject it and not get you to that heightened state of consciousness after you take it so many times. So, the non-addictive quality of it, and really the ability of psychedelics to address the root of the situations, whatever is going on in a person's brain, whether it's a looping type of thought pattern or neurons that need to be repaired from trauma, essentially. I don't think it's yet to be seen if cannabis can, is a really great Band-Aid, is a better Band-Aid than the current Band-Aids that we have right now, or cannabis can fix that. That's yet to be seen. I think that cannabis advocates should really be pushing for more data on this, because we know so little about it. But psychedelics can have this ability to get you to a place where you can really address these issues that nothing else has been able to address. So to me, they're two very different medicines. But, we follow in the heels of cannabis, right? Which has its own baggage. And I think that a lot of members,
because of the Schedule 1, I guess, category.
No, more so the path that cannabis advocacy has taken, with a real push to advocate for it at a state level, and medical programs that came up in various jurisdictions that very quickly turn into recreational use. I feel like medical programs were a bit half-baked in a way, that they weren't true medical programs. I know the program in DC was very half-baked, where you go to a doctor and say you have headaches, and they'll give you a card, and I think members of Congress feel a little burned by that. So we got to ensure
they have every right. I think they have every right to be. I mean, I have my medical card in Florida. I got it about a month ago. It took me, I just never wanted it. I literally walked into the office. The doctor was like, "You have a pulse, sign 2 papers. You're free to go to the dispensary right out of here." Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a huge advocate for legalizing cannabis. Cannabis is recreational.
Absolutely.
It has some medical properties, I don't think it should be seen as a medicine. And there's a lot of things that people in the cannabis industry don't want to talk about, like, is it addictive? Like, does it affect your cognition with prolonged use? Should there be THC caps? Like, there's a lot of things that make sense.
Yeah.
Psychedelics, I think, couldn't be farther from cannabis. I think that there's definitely some things to mirror to get psychedelics pushed forward, but I think it's apples to oranges when you look at the two. It is probably easy from a regulatory perspective, though, using cannabis as that base case as per the steps that psychedelics need to go through. But the medical program for cannabis is, if anything, it's a dark cloud hanging over the sector versus something that's positive, or at least that's the way I see it.
That's interesting that you said about some people from Congress and kind of feel like they've been kind of burned with regards to the industry. So is that
true?
Yeah.
It's 100% true. I mean, back in 3-4 years ago, when California, or no, it was longer than that, when California was still medical, you could land in California, take your iPhone, fire up a teledoc thing in 5 minutes. Okay, here's your card, go to the dispensary. Like, it's only for the money. Like, I had to pay $360 for my cannabis card. Like, that is the only reason that there is medical cannabis, is for incremental revenue.
But to your point, Anthony, I think a lot of people know that, but it's like, do enough people want to talk about it? And, you know, you got your cannabis, you know, advocates, so to speak. But to your point too, Melissa, like, I think when you have these conversations, it doesn't matter which way you spin it or sell it. The data is there. It starts and ends with the data. And that's, you know, the telling part, which is grabbing a lot of attention. I think a lot of reviewers would be interested to know, and I don't know if you can share this, but who would you say are some of the notable names that you're having conversations with in Washington?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said, who are some of the notable names in Washington that you're having conversations about the industry?
Yeah. Cory Booker is a pretty early advocate for this. He has introduced multiple pieces of legislation. His chief of staff just got featured in a Washington Post article that ran about a week ago, where she admitted that she participates in ayahuasca ceremonies. So he's a more senior member. He's very respected by Democrats and Republicans.
Does he view cannabis and psychedelics differently?
I think so. I think when you're talking about rescheduling, though, it's very much a sequential order of action. So rescheduling, like, they're going to reschedule MDMA because they have to, because it's gone through FDA clinical trial. But when we're talking about rescheduling psychedelics as a much broader category, I don't think anything is there's not going to be any congressional action on psychedelics until they've kind of tackled this cannabis issue, which I feel like we're very close to. But when we're discussing, you know, psychedelic assisted therapy, it is viewed in a very different healthcare lens. So it's in a way they're connected, but also not completely intertwined with each other. And, you know, I've had really positive conversations with the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, on this. He is the most senior ranking person in the Senate.
Yeah, of course.
Supportive of psychedelic assisted therapy, in that, you know, as long as we are approaching this issue and making our asks really practical, and not like shooting for the moon and saying, you know, psychedelics should be available in dispensaries. I think as long as we keep this in a medical context for now, we're going to have the ears of many of the senior members in House and Senate. I think because the approach is very different. We're having discussions with veteran advocates. We're bringing researchers from Johns Hopkins, from NYU to the Hill, and talking about it. It is viewed very differently, but you know, that's helpful to us for the reasons we've already stated. But that's also helpful in reaching offices that you wouldn't always assume would be supportive of this. Like, the entire Texas delegation on the Hill is really supportive of this, because they've heard from so many veterans in Texas.
Think about that. That's incredible, right?
Yeah, but they support their meds.
Like Freedom Caucus, like really right conservative members are supportive of this and putting their name on this. And that's why we started a PAC, a political action committee, because there are some really great members that have put their name on this, and we want to ensure that they remain protected in their reelection campaigns. We want to provide them political cover so that their opponents can't run against them based on this issue, because this issue is rife for, people to run crazy headlines about and scare tactics on psychedelics. We've already seen a little taste of it with like media outlets like Fox News and Breitbart. They're kind of alluding to, well, so many people are doing this and we have to be very careful going forward. So I feel like while currently there's no real formal opposition to this, we all need to tread very carefully to ensure that it remains that way, and keeping it as bipartisan as possible and as inclusive as possible, and inclusive not in the way that we normally think about inclusive, but inclusive of various perspectives. That's why with our advocacy or our public education that we're doing, we're trying to target communities that really haven't been included in conversations that involve psychedelic science, like moms in suburban Virginia that tend to vote Republican. What do they think about this? What do they know about this? Let's educate them so they understand this is not a recreational thing we're discussing. We're talking about the therapeutic use in a clinical setting, and safety is top of mind, and ensuring that people have the support that they need when they go through these processes is really important. But,
I think that's the key with a lot of politicians, as you hit it right there. It's all about safety. Moving forward with regards to the industry, we look at MAPS. We've been hearing rumors that their phase 3 MDMA, it's an FDA trial for MDMA, and a phase 3 readouts that are supposed to happen at any given time now. Rumors are circulating around the industry that they're going to be extremely strong. Fingers crossed that they are. If they are, what does that do for the industry? And more importantly, to like what you're doing right now, to like the conversations you're having in Washington?
Yeah, that's like the initial hurdle, right? Like ketamine has been available, and it's been the increase in ketamine in the last few years has been meaningful, but I don't think that people on the outside of the psychedelic space view ketamine as a psychedelic. No. I think that MDMA crossing over that threshold, that really critical FDA approval, will break so many boundaries that exist for the entire industry. And it's only going to be a positive thing. And everyone in the psychedelic space should be rooting for MAPS right now, because it's going to break boundaries, and it's going to expand the conversations we're having about mental health and what the potential here is. Like I said before, I think that, it's going to be for PTSD, but, if the results are kind of groundbreaking, like we anticipate them to be, we can say, well, what else can this solve? And that's what's exciting to me, is beyond mental health, like the other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and issues like autism. Like what are the possibilities here with psychedelics? So MDMA getting approved and having really compelling data that's attached to that approval is going to be really amazing for laying groundwork for the rest of the industry to come through clinical trial. I think that the industry has been hurting these last couple of years with what's going on with the economy, but I think that's actually going to attract more institutional investors into this space, hopefully, and hopefully more capital will be flowing as well.
Yeah,
I think it's, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but some of these institutional investors, like, it hits home to them too. Like that's why I think there's garnering a lot of interest. At the end of the day, they're running a business. They got to make sophisticated investment decisions. But, you look at a lot of wealthy philanthropists that are getting involved, and I find it hits home a lot. And that's why, and in some ways, this is getting a lot of bipartisan support in Washington.
Yeah, I think Melissa nailed it at the beginning. Mental illness affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. People, and chances are, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an individual in this country right now that doesn't have somebody that's either a firsthand or a secondhand relationship that has mental illness or is addicted to opiates. You'd be very, very hard pressed. So when you're speaking about this, when I'm speaking about this with people, And when you start to bring up psychedelics, you start to bring up data, and you start to talk to people like someone like Wiz, who's had firsthand accounts with this stuff and understand how it's affecting people and how it's actually working, it's really very hard to look at this with a negative lens. Because pretty much everybody can mention someone that this could affect, or that someone that this could add utility to their life. And I mean, that's going to catch, I think it's already caught fire. I mean, the conversation's there. You've got Steve Cohen, you've got McCluskey, the founder of Tom's. You've got guys that are donating money by the droves to these. You've got potential FDA approval. Like, this thing is snowballing.
Do you not believe, like with MAPS getting front page coverage on the Wall Street Journal multiple days actually, after the conference, their new CEO on MSNBC. But if you said, Melissa, we get groundbreaking data on their phase 3 readouts, do you not think that we'll see right away a lot more like headline names of people writing checks, getting more and more involved in this space?
Hopefully. I mean, that only helps advocates like us with getting buy-in to people that have access to money like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to do this work, and as much support as we can get from people that aren't already in this space, already donating. So, you know, Rick Doblin's been doing this for so long, and you don't want your donors to get fatigued. So you always want to be reaching out to new communities that could potentially be interested in this. And Anthony, you're so right. Like, there's not one person I have met that hasn't been impacted by addiction or mental health. And I think that's because, you know, these issues manifest differently in people in different ways. And I don't think that our country had a really great grasp of what depression was, of what PTSD was.
Yeah.
It's such an individual experience. And even like we're talking about violence in urban communities and how that's like people in cities are really going through it right now. And I'm a DC resident, and I see it in my own community, just what's going on with some of the violence that's happening. And a lot of our societal issues go back to mental health issues and generational trauma that certain communities experience. And how that manifests is, you know, it sometimes it will manifest as, you know, just, you know, an inability to engage with everyday, you know, normal behavior, or it is somebody that that commits crime because they just don't know that they're angry and they feel dejected from society and disenfranchised from the systems, and this is how it manifests. So now that we're learning so much about mental health through a lot of it through the progress of psychedelic medicine, but we're educating the American people about what mental health is and how that appears in people's lives. And when you start to share stories, people like advocates like Wiz, people like me who, you know, everyday average working mom who's never tried a psychedelic, but then, you know, was desperate enough to try it, that opens people's minds to, you know, my mom, I think, had postpartum depression, and, you know, I didn't realize it until you shared your story. I related to some of the experiences you went through. And, you know, I didn't realize that was depression. I just thought that that's who she was. But now we have a better understanding of what people who go through these things go through. And I'm hoping with research and this, boosting up the research funding and the science that's surrounding this will really bring to light what's actually going on in our bodies when we experience traumatic events. So, but the more this issue becomes more mainstream, I think the better the discussions we're going to have about mental health and what not only our government can do, but how our communities need to support this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. We've got a long way to go. I mean, one of the more interesting studies was, I think there was a gentleman that was like a hardcore like white supremacist, lifelong white supremacist that had a couple of PAT sessions. I think it was involving DMT or LSD, and like 2 weeks later, completely on plane, like completely fine. All of the notions of hate that were in his brain. I think it also stems to a lot of, we don't even truly understand the brain to the extent that we need to. But I mean, there's a lot of things when you look at the applicability of these compounds that they can be used for. Not saying that we need to start doing PAT with with racists to fundamentally change the way that they think. But they're very interesting. There's very interesting, groundbreaking things going on in the sector. Well, I think it's just going to keep going.
And you're dead on. We didn't know. We just didn't put the funding to research how our brain functions. And for how many decades were we told that depression is a chemical imbalance in your brain? And only a few years ago, it was revealed that it's not a chemical imbalance. It's about the connections in your brain. So there is a lot to learn. Yes. Yeah.
Melissa, do you think in any way MDMA could get rescheduled after the readouts from MAPS, like in the near term?
Yeah, it has to get rescheduled. There is a law that passed that after FDA approval of a Schedule I substance, there's 90 days to reschedule it. So
this could happen fast.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how. I mean, I personally think it's going to be next year, maybe first, second quarter next year. I don't like to make predictions on these things. The government, likes to slow roll things in general.
Yep.
And this is a very big deal. MDMA getting approved, so they're proceeding with caution here.
Yeah,
but
I get it.
They are proceeding. They did FDA released their guidelines for psychedelic therapy, which is a great starting point. I think it needs some work. But there's a comment period that's open right now. We'll be submitting comments. A lot of aligned organizations will be submitting comments and just trying to improve on what their understanding of this issue is. So I think the rescheduling is absolutely going to happen. I don't know if, there is the political will to reschedule all psychedelics in one fell swoop. I think it's going to be incremental, step by step, as more and more research comes online. But that's advocacy. It's we have to be committed to the long term here. There isn't going to be a snap of your fingers and our government's going to change who they are and how they do things. This is how things are done. I mean, even the Affordable Health Care Act, like that wasn't just Obama passing ACA. That was decades and decades of conversations about healthcare that led to that moment where there was an opportunity where the Democrats had the House and the Senate and they could get something passed very narrowly. So it is to make meaningful change in our country. We really need to go step by step. And I know so many people are excited about psychedelics. I'm obviously very excited about it. I left my day job to do this work last year.
No kidding.
Yeah. And
it's gratifying.
It's also heart-wrenching at times too, because I care so much about it. But
that's good though. That's good. If you don't care about something, you just put in the motions. That's what leads to mental health. I had the corporate job, was making great money, and sober 11 years, and I flat out collapsed at work, and I went through hell for a year. Like, I didn't know who I was, didn't know what my goal in life was. And I think when you go through those sorts of things, it sticks with you forever. And
forever.
It changes you. So
it changed me for the better. But I'm trying to create a system where one day, if my children need help in this with their mental health, that they have resources that they can legally access, that it's safe for them, that they have data-backed solutions that they can explore. So we're doing this for generations to come, and it's going to fundamentally shift how we treat mental health in this country.
God bless Rick Doblin. Have either one of you seen the movie Rudy, Notre Dame football player?
A long time ago.
Yes, many years ago.
You wonder if Rick Doblin and Rudy are related, because those guys were both very persistent people. I don't know how, 37, 38 years. 37 years.
Man out of vision.
The tenacity you have to have to be committed to something like that.
Imagine waking up on an overcast third week, November 1994. Been doing it for about 8-9 years, and no quit in the guy whatsoever.
No,
pretty amazing.
He's on the other team's 10-yard line, so he's made progress.
He's an example for all of us. Yeah,
we're getting there.
For sure. They don't make them like they used to, do they?
No. Attention span's gotten way too short thanks to TikTok.
Yeah. This has been great. I really appreciate the dialogue, and I'd like to have more conversations with you as time progresses. And I think it'd be interesting to see some of the conversations that you have once these readouts are happening. And if there's
Yeah.
developments of obviously MDMA being rescheduled, I think this is an ongoing conversation that a lot of our viewers would be interested in knowing as we advance the overall industry.
Yeah, I think there's so much potential here and so much innovation that can happen if we just partnered with the federal government. It's just getting them there, and we'll get them there. But I think we can really transform how Americans perceive healthcare and what kind of services are available here. And psychedelics are an interesting space to reside in because there is so much. It's not just purely healthcare. There's a community element here where
Yeah.
you really need that support, and there's an underground that's really thriving. So it's how do
Yeah.
we put all these pieces together? And it's not just a federal effort. It's a federal, it's a state, it's a local effort. It's a really complicated topic, but I'm
Yeah.
here for it. So
Well, I think I speak on
Yeah.
behalf of Anthony and probably the entire psychedelic community. Keep up the great work. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank
And please, let's keep in touch.
yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
What's up, everyone? So what'd you think of the interview? Are there any more questions you want us to ask that you want to learn more of? Then leave a comment below and let us know what you think. As usual, share this video with your network, smash that like button, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.